Welcome to Self-Care as a Sacred Practice, where we are talking about the missing keys to motivation and healthy choices made happy and joyful and whole, and as an expression of who you are and what you care about and what you love as an act of service and love and generosity, rather than this grim chore that we have to wedge into our lives, and as an experience that too few people have, and we want to shift to that, and that's what we're all doing here in this series. I have gathered a whole series of a whole lineup of wonderful experts to talk about all the different ways we can do that. I am Robin Landis, your host. I am a certified transformational holistic health coach, fitness trainer, motivation specialist, fitness nutrition specialist. I am an herbalist and the author of Body Fueling and Herbal Defense, and a forthcoming third book, which very well may be called Self-Care as a Sacred Practice, but we'll see. Title to be determined. And so we're here talking about, how we can give ourselves the good things, the things that we need and that fuel us and nourish us, and how we can do that with joy and a sense of choice, and as a gift, recognizing that life is a gift. So, and how we can inspire that in ourselves and each other. So today's expert is Eloise Erasmus, and I am delighted to have her. I know her in several contexts, which we will talk about. But she is a licensed, I've got her bio here, so I'm just going to refer to it. She's a licensed psychologist in private practice at Aslan Institute. That's a holistic mental health clinic in Minnesota. She has a PhD in psychology, a master's in culture and spirituality, and a BA in anthropology from the University of Chicago. She's trained in, I'm not going to name all the different kinds of therapies, but integral theory, transpersonal development, Tonglen practice, meditation. She specializes in trauma and anxiety, depression, and eating disorders. And she teaches courses on human development. She co-leads Tonglen practice groups, pilgrimages in the US and internationally. She's very well traveled. She was born in South Africa, and she's lived in Europe, Africa, and Asia. So she's very sensitive to culture and race and gender, and healing in those areas, awareness, compassion, self-empowerment. And she's dedicated to promoting self-awareness, social justice in the world, healing from the inside out. I talk about healing from the inside out and nourishing ourselves from the inside out as well. So it's a great match. And her topic today is fueling our highest potential with love and compassion. We're going to unpack that in a lot of different ways. Super excited for this interview with just a beautiful and brilliant person. Thank you, Eloise, for taking the time to be here today. Yeah. So, there's so much to talk about in this topic, but why don't we, I think it would be a good idea for our viewers to start out by getting a sense of, you're not an ordinary therapist. And of course, many therapists, nobody's ordinary, but you are, your approach at Aslan, you guys have developed this, I love your tagline is about sacred service and learning to serve. And that is so compatible with the idea of this whole series and really my work, which is that self-care can be an act of service. People think of it as selfish, like it's about me. And yes, you do want to take care of yourself, but so that it's much more empowering when it's in service of something, of service, of some kind of love and generosity and some kind of giving, and then it becomes this beautiful circle. So can you talk more about how service is a part of your therapeutic approach and your evolution of consciousness model? So how evolution and without getting too, what's the word, academic, but I would love to introduce people a little bit to how service and evolution are woven into all of this for you.
Yeah. Oh, okay, great. So I think what would be really helpful to really answer that question is just give a little bit of framework of just kind of the evolution of consciousness model, which is kind of a map of human development. And, it's really mapping many different theorists' understanding of how humans develop over time. And so if we understand that as individuals, we're coming into form, first, when we're born, we're not aware of ourselves, right? As a person that's thinking and feeling and needing. We're just instinctually living in this space-time, responding, crying when we're hungry, pay attention to me, please attune to me. It's in relationship that, the caregiver will tune in. And, if your anxiety or your distress goes up as a child, hopefully the caregiver tunes in and helps calm them down. And so we learn this regulation in relationship, but there's no awareness of that per se, right? And then later on, so I'm just going to give just the overview. So first we're in that stage of that space instinct, that's 0 to 5, more or less, right? And then we start developing the left brain, right? Words, thinking, and we get taught to pay attention, don't hold, if you're hungry, you need to wait, right? You are this, you're not that. So we get into the realm of the dualistic thinking, and oftentimes part of that socialization is saying, do this, don't do this, you're that, you're not that. And so we enter into this realm of the ego. People talk about this as ego functioning, right? And so what happens is the body and emotion needs oftentimes get repressed to be socialized or conform. And what happens is we lose the connection with what we're feeling and needing in order to survive. So it becomes a survival function. And we also develop a personality based on that to stay safe in the world based on what's rewarded and what's not, right? So if we think about then self-care, what ultimately happens is we suffer enough by being so disconnected from our bodies, right? And our feelings and what we're really needing, because, repress that at all costs because people get anxious and don't know what to do about it and respond to it, in this controlling kind of, fixing sort of way, one up kind of hierarchy way, right? So you get to a point where you're like, oh, this isn't working and I don't feel good and I'm sick and I'm in pain and I'm suffering. Yeah. And you start asking the questions, and instead of looking out there, you ask yourself, what am I actually really feeling and what am I needing? Yeah. And by then you learning through awareness to reattune with yourself, now the capacity for self-care gets developed, right? So this becomes an evolutionary journey. We all go through this, right? Mm-hmm. And so, what I love about what you're talking about is as soon as we start really tuning into what we're feeling and needing, we can choose to lovingly respond to that and meet that need. Or we can do what we might have learned to do, which is abuse or neglect ourselves in some way and say, oh, that's stupid, ignore it. Oh, I can't do that, and just collapse into like a victim state, right? And then we don't really do anything about it. So we lose the empowerment and the choice when we get identified with that fight flight response that's either collapsing or abusing yourself and putting yourself down and judging. Yeah. And so through this, amazing work that you do, Robin, is you're talking about pay attention. Who are you? What do you feel? What do you need? Bring your attention back to you so that what's fueling and motivating you is the inner, right? Yeah. Which is really a healing of the past trauma of what got internalized and became automatic from how we were socialized. Yeah. And so when we can then tune into what we're feeling and needing, we can respond lovingly. That is a required prerequisite to be of service to anyone else in the world. Because if I can't see my own feelings and needs, there's no way I can tune into your feelings and needs, right? And if I see it, but I'm doing nothing about it, that's how I'm going to relate to my kid. That's how I'm going to relate to my husband. That's how I'm going to relate to the world. Yeah. So from this perspective, self-care is social justice, right? It is. I love that. It is bringing down the walls, right? Like if we can bring down our own inner walls, we can also bring down the walls interpersonally or across cultures or across genders, right? Because then we can see, oh, you're a human just like me. And guess what? As humans, we have these universal human needs for safety, to be seen, to be nourished, to have choice, to have meaning, to fulfill our potential, right? Yeah. And if I can learn how to do that and honor that in me, I will not only be modeling that for the next generation, for my kids, but I'll be interacting with others where I'm actually supporting that in them. And it doesn't become this competition or this comparison or
authoritative top down, you should do this thing. Yeah.
Right. So from that perspective, our evolution moves us more and more towards service if we do our inner work, which is about tuning in and nourishing ourselves, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I really feel like I see this so often that when people really are filled up, you know, when they're able to give themselves what they need, we're just natural. We don't have to tell people to go serve. You know, it's sort of like, well, I got all this good stuff. I mean, I feel really good. I feel, you know, I have so much energy and I have so much to give. Like, now I'm noticing, you know, I've tended to what was crying here, and now there's a lot of crying out there. What can I eat? Just, you know, as a human being, there's this natural desire to help, you know, to give. But it's just, I think a lot of people have a hard time giving because they think, I'm so depleted, how could I possibly give? Right. But when you really are, when the tanks are full in all the ways, and there's so many ways to do that, not even just the typical ways, I think, that we think about in this culture about health and fitness, but, you know, the obvious ones like food and movement and rest and that, but the, you know, when we really widen out our lens, our aperture about nourishment, really giving ourselves all the things that we need, and we realize that's not selfish because we're so filled up that we're here ready to be a vessel of an agent of change, or, you know, and it doesn't have to be some big giant, you don't have to be Martin Luther King, you have to make a big difference in the world, right? And I think that's in your work too, you know, helping people see service as just, you know, not this, I mean, you have done many amazing things around the world, but you don't have to leave the country and go do amazing pilgrimages unless you want to. You can serve at many levels.
Yeah. And I think for me, the most sacred service is when you're actually tuning in to you and taking good care of you. And then it ripples out.
Yeah.
Because so much of like what happens is, you know, we spend so much energy like pushing down our pain or pushing down our unmet needs or not paying attention, you know, like living in defense is constricted. It's like being in fight flight mode, like it's draining, right? So if we learn that we don't need to do that because we actually have the capacity now and more, you know, to take care of ourselves, like we don't have to be stuck in the past, like in that childhood state, right?
Yeah.
If you're not putting all this energy here, it frees you up.
Yeah.
That in and of itself is also fueling and nourishing, right?
Yeah. And energizing, because not so much energy is going to. Yeah. What occurred to me when you just said that was I just noticed how that thing about that, not giving yourself what you need, not giving yourself what you need, you know, this strange cultural convention, this notion of self-care as being selfish. And, you know, at this point in my journey, of course, I've been on my own long journey, but it's, you know, again, it's been an evolution for all of us. Every speaker in this series has talked about journey and an evolution, has started in some place where they had to learn for themselves and then wanted to share it, you know. But to think about self-care as selfish is such a strange idea now to me, because you can just hear, even in the way you were talking about, you know, treating yourself that way, you know, denying yourself the good stuff, you know, the nourishing stuff, like you deny yourself nourishment in some way. That's so selfish. It's you know, I talk a lot about how it's selfish to others because you're then kind of bringing a sort of C level or D level or F level of, instead of the A game, you know, you're bringing sort of this like depleted self to life and to others. And if you really want to, if you think you want to be so selfless, then bring your juicy, you know, robust, loved up best. But it's actually just so selfish to yourself. I just really got that when it's just so mean.
You know, like, Robin, it makes me think, like, if we imagined our bodies as a baby crying, would it be selfish to not feed it, to not let it rest?
I'm writing that down.
When it cries, that you wouldn't respond, your heart wouldn't open. Wouldn't it be selfish to not do something? Like, I feel it's the opposite, right?
Selfish, yeah.
Right, like, selfish is like, oh, I couldn't be bothered. I don't want to bother. I just going to neglect and abuse myself. That's selfish.
Yeah.
Right? But actually tuning in and saying, you know what? You're a being that's in pain, and I can do something.
Yeah.
That's service, and that's sacred, right? And so why is it, you know, I mean, it's really interesting, like how our own bodies, right, or our emotions have been so judged and vilified and repressed, right? And that's really, to me, the abuse and the neglect is selfish.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's interesting how, you know, I think we're really underscoring here how we just, for whatever reason, and there are probably, you know, myriad reasons we could riff off on, which we won't go down that road necessarily, but you know, how we got here as a culture, but as a culture, there is instead of health and fitness being this conversation that we're having today and in this series, which is what I'm trying to do, is change the conversation, shift and transform that conversation, with the help of people who really see this. And I think it is happening and can happen. But, culturally, largely, health, fitness, and medicine is very stuck in this idea that, we come to dis-ease, literally disease, dis-ease with this treatment, this cruel and sort of, or neglectful treatment of ourselves. We do this throughout life. Then we get sick. And then there is judgment. Then there's sort of like, you're not fit. You're not in shape. You're fat. You're unhealthy. You need to change. And then it's like, here come all of the regimens and the treatments and the fixing things, right, that are like designed to make you better because you're wrong, because you're all messed up, even though, you know what I mean? Like, the whole thing is sort of this setup. It's like a backwards setup. It's like,
you're just being shamed, right?
Yeah,
and evoking more fear.
Neglect. You were neglected, and then it's basically, again, using your baby analogy, it's like if a baby were neglected and abused and then grew up into a neglected and abused adult and they're messed up, it's like now you're shaming that for being ill, and instead of like, wow, how are we going to gently and kindly and generously nourish that back to health? It's like, how are we going to fix that? Get on your diet regimen and whip yourself back into shape. Let's be more mean to you after you got sick because you were mean to you. If you really look at it that way, I've never quite put it in those words, but it's like, that's really that's the sort of downward spiral. But we're looking at sort of an upward spiral of evolution, a journey that's possible where you can start listening to yourself, loving up yourself. Self-love is a lofty concept for some people. It sounds so big and it sounds like a cliche, but really it's just about like getting that you have, it's self-valuing. It's like getting, you have value, you're worthy, you're worth good things, kindness. It's a kindness to give yourself good things, to be nourished. So, given that we've sort of mentioned, the idea that we've all been on this journey and all of us, having come to a place, where we're trying to share and give in various ways to help people on their journey. Do you want to say a little bit about like, how has this evolved for you in terms of, you obviously have a lot of education, many degrees, and you're an accomplished therapist and work with many people on important things. How has this been embodied for you? How's this come into embodiment for you on your own journey of, self-care and self-nourishment?
Yeah, I think that's, I think that's such a great segue, because you're just talking about, as humans, we learn and automatically internalize ways of being that will include some form of abuse and neglect. Everyone does, including me. And I might not even see it, but as soon as I see it, it's not like I need to shame myself for it. It's right. Like, oh, I learned that. And I don't even know how to do it. Like, I didn't even think about like, oh, I need to just turn inward and listen, and and maybe I didn't know all the tools and what's out there, right? So for me, it's been really wonderful. I mean, I met you, Robin, several years ago at a meditation retreat, and then I reached out to you because, when you talk about doing this work, you're not just talking about it, but you embody it. And you have a vibrancy and a joy and an energy. So it's not just talking about it, you're doing the practice, right? And so I think what you're saying is it's one thing to know a lot of the information. Yeah. But how do you actually embody that? And so, I've, for you guys listening, I've worked with you as, you've been a coach to me in my own journey. Yeah. And it's been so helpful because I might have, there was that one moment where I was like, you know what, I don't really like moving and I'm not really active. And, and you're like, wow, are you even listening to what you're saying? And let's really look at that. And why don't you describe what you've really been doing? Yeah. And I'm like, oh, well, I do this and this and this. And you're like, well, that's interesting because everything you're describing sounds really active and like you're a really active woman. And I'm like, oh, I didn't see that. So what I'm saying is like, we have a lot of blind spots. We don't even know what we're doing because it's so automatically, it's so conditioned, right? Yeah. And even like, we don't even realize what language we're using.
Absolutely.
What I love, and what I loved about what you pointed out was just notice what you're saying, and then you reflected back what I also said, which was actually more true. And I realized, I'm automatically repeating a script of a past experience from middle school and high school, that wasn't actually the truth. So I was living a lie. So it wasn't about you saying, just think positively and you're active.
Right, exactly.
You're saying, turn inward and really look at the truth.
Yes.
Oh, you mean I am? I am. I am. You know what? I don't have to live underneath the abuse and the everything that I lived, you know, all the judgments I got as a young woman and the cultural ideas of what active is, you know, like, you know, we unpacked that.
Yeah.
And that was really, you know, so this is an ongoing thing. And the other piece that I really love is, you know, we're always going to be noticing where we are in our journey and how do we love wherever we are.
Yeah.
Like, we don't have to say, oh no, you know, you should be here, or why were you back there?
Yeah.
Because wherever we are is what we're aware of, and the practice is simply to get aware of wherever we are so that we can tune in even more and do the next practice that makes it even better, more responsive, right? Yeah. And I think that's what I loved. Another piece that I loved about the work with you is, you know, it's like, well, you know, you're enjoying, you know, you like introduced, you know, drink a nice cacao, but why don't we upgrade it? You could add some reishi mushroom. Yeah. You know, like it's always, it just becomes an ongoing, like, oh, how can it be even more nourishing? How can it be even more fueling? How can it be more joyful? Yeah. Right? Yeah. Yeah. So, you know,
yeah, it's been beautiful to watch your journey, I have to say. And I think, you know, you started in one of my online courses, which is just a 9-week thing. And then, you know, we continued with coaching. But I remember that during the course, sharing with you some of I forget exactly what it was, but I was posting in the Facebook group some stuff about like, I don't know, some food, something like, this is what, you know, a meal could look like, or this is what, you know, snack ideas or whatever. And you were like, we get to have all that? That's, you know, like that, again, like sort of like that idea of what's active, or, you know, what's healthy. It's like we have so many fixed ideas and judgments already now. We have the already knowing that we bring, you know, to health and fitness. We don't realize how much juicy, good stuff that we could love and that's delicious in every sense could be nourishing. And I just remember that sort of the joy that started to come in was sort of like, wow, we get to have all that, like, yes, and more, you know.
And I remember along those lines, it was also like, you know, if you really just tune into enjoying the, you know, the drink or the food in front of you, or the exercise and the movement, and you feel it in your body, it's like, if I'm living in my head all the time, I don't even notice it. I don't even experience the joy of it, right? And so it's even like, and then I remember you saying, well, you know, there was one moment about, you know, what's motivating you? And I'm like, well, it's order to get, and then you ask the question, well, what about just enjoying, like allowing yourself to enjoy the experience, you know? And that was like, yeah, how about that? How about us allowing ourselves to enjoy what is there if our perception and awareness is tuning into it, right? Like if we're disconnected and we don't even see it, we don't even get to enjoy the nourishment that could be right there. That's just a matter of shifting your perspective and your attention.
Yeah, and it can happen in so many ways. Right? Yeah, there's so
it is inherently energizing and pleasurable. Yeah. There's joy inherently in taking good care of ourselves.
Oh, yes.
So,
yeah, I love it's fun to hear you reflect this back now, because one of the things I do remember is that from at the beginning that you talked about was that you wanted to get from your head into your body, you know, that there was a sort of wanting to, you know, it's easy for you to think about this stuff a lot, and you are so smart, you know. Again, you're just like look at your bio, and it's like, wow, she's got a lot of degrees, you know. and you know, you're brilliant, and yet you were missing that embodiment. That's what you really wanted, was that embodiment, that experience of pleasure and joy in nourishing yourself. And so to get out of the ideas, and what I like is I kind of heard some of that in the beginning when you introduced the whole, you know, the whole idea of the evolution of consciousness and that model, and the whole, the way self-care, you see self-care as service, is how we sort of, culturally, we're sort of indoctrinated in thinking. There's a lot of thinking, or, you know, a lot of ideas and thinking, and it's just sort of not as much experiencing, you know, or listening, right? Mm-hmm. So getting out of our heads a little bit. So beautiful to hear. Let's see, what else were we going to talk about? Yeah, one of the things that in our, I know our conversations about our respective work and in our ways, we're both helping people grow and evolve and become, like embody their full potential. And one of the interesting things I think about that we don't think about is that takes energy.
Mm-hmm.
That in itself also is something that we want to fuel, and nourish. That it literally takes, and like growth is sometimes challenging. Sometimes it's wonderful and uplifting and it's a great ride, and sometimes it's, growth is a journey that asks a lot of us sometimes, and that if that is our context for caring for ourselves, if we nourish that, the experience of that is so different than trying to eat so we can, I don't know, be thin next month or something. You can just hear the difference. One is sort of in our head and it comes from cultural ideals that maybe don't come from us. Mm-hmm. And the other is like, I'm sure that when people work with you, when people go to a therapist, and I've done a lot of therapy in my life, so I can speak firsthand to this. Myself had a wonderful therapist and did incredible growth work. But it's, it can take a lot, ultimately it gives to you, but it can take a lot too. Mm-hmm. And so can you speak to that a little bit about, when someone is in a journey, any kind of evolutionary process or therapeutic process, that how much we want to be good to ourselves, how much compassion and generosity to ourselves can actually support our growth and our potential. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. If we're already depleted physically, right, we're not getting enough sleep, right? Any kind of inner work is so much harder because we haven't given ourselves the fuel and the foundation to just support the work. Because a lot of the inner work is about connecting with past pain or traumas that you've experienced.
Yeah.
And so what will actually happen is you're going to activate through memory being in a state of fight, flight, or freeze physiologically. Yeah. So if your body is already exhausted and in a fight, flight, or freeze, it's supportive to provide, even physiologically in the present moment, your body is safe now and is nourished now. Yeah. And let's get it enough sleep, and let's get it enough fuel, and let's show you that your body is actually nourished and safe now, so you don't have to keep living in a memory of a trauma state from the past. Yes. And if you do go there, you do have that to support you. Yeah. Right? And I'm not exactly sure if that's what you meant, but that's where I went with that. Yeah. So it's like, even in there are two traditions even in meditation, right? Like typically speaking, people divide it up as they're the calming practices, which are a little bit more of the emotion regulation practices, and then they're the insight practices that's really tuning into whatever is coming up that can include suffering, right? Yeah. So one is to calm down and support that. Those practices, those meditative practices, both of them together work really well, because if you're able to get back into, I am safe, I am grounded, I'm connected to the ground of my own being, I can calm, I have the capacity to go in to where the suffering is, right? And so that becomes the path of the warrior, right? How do you bring deep healing? Even if you imagine going out in the world, right? You go into a war-torn country. If you yourself physiologically are calm and alert, you are going to be much more effective to respond to whatever's in front of you, because that's not going to trigger and trigger you into a trauma stress state, and physiologically you're stuck, then you can't do anything, right?
Right. Which again goes to that whole thing of, how could you be of service if you are, you're depleted or stuck or frozen in some way.
Right.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I meant to read, when I talked about your topic, fueling our highest potential with love and compassion, I meant to read out some of the things that you wrote. I often do that with the speakers, and so, some stuff that Eloise wrote to me about her topic. Self-care is a developmental achievement. I think we touched on that a little bit, but we will a little more. I love that. Cultivating greater capacity. I think that's that this is what you're talking about right now, is that one of the things we're really talking about caring for ourselves, about giving ourselves the nourishment we need, is that we're building capacity to give, capacity to achieve, capacity to live however it is we want to live, and whatever it is we want to give. It's capacity. And the more capacity we have, and capacity to heal. Because healing, we grow our capacity by healing, but also healing takes some resilience, and when you mentioned the warrior thing, that's what triggered me to remember that you wrote some stuff to me. A deep warrior practice of bringing love, truth, and compassion to where there is pain. I love that, and I love it. I want to say, I can hear in this, I think it's good to tease this out a little bit, that we want to, I think when in this context, and in a feminine context, especially when we talk about being a warrior, what I hear and feel is the fierceness of love, the fierceness in a positive sense. So not the warrior, not the warrior who's going out and, killing and pillaging or something, the sort of the cultural idea of warrior, but, but to be like a spiritual warrior or warrioress, meaning, to fiercely be a stand in the world for bringing goodness. And again, you can just hear how the circle has to be complete, and you have to be included in that,
Yeah, I love that, because, it's the energy of being protective and responsive, right?
Yes.
And devoted.
Oh, protective.
So it's not collapsing.
Yeah.
It's not collapsing in the face of challenge and hardship and pain and disconnect. It's like, oh, I'm disconnecting. No, I will reconnect.
Yeah.
That takes energy. That takes motivation, right? But the idea is, it's coming from the heart. It's coming from love.
Yeah.
And speaking up. It takes a certain energy that says, no, don't abuse. I won't abuse me. No, I will not neglect me. And that is a powerful energy. That is like an empowering, and it reminds me also of like the yoga practices. Yoga practices are also supporting the inner growth, right? So you have the warrior practices, or you have the strength training to embody, to physiologically support that inner practice of saying, no, I will not collapse. I will respond. I will care. I will see my need. I will meet it. No, I'm not going to go into a dissociative trance and not pay attention to what I'm needing, right? Like with, sometimes with eating disorders, you go away, it's like, no, I see I'm going away. Come back, because it's loving, right?
So beautiful. Yeah, that is so brilliant and beautiful. I love when you said protective, responsive, and I can't read my handwriting. You said three things in a row. I'm going to go back. There's so much good stuff here. Sometimes it's fun in these dialogues. I'm getting so many, as many ways as I have of speaking about this and looking at it. I'm getting so many more. That was part of the idea here, is to bring in all these different, diverse perspectives on this theme. But just even those two things, to be protective and responsive. As an idea, as a way of thinking about what it is to be the new definition for being fierce and a warrior, not to crush and, name, to be protective and responsive.
Yeah. And I think, that ties into the whole idea of self-care as spiritual bypass, or because sometimes what people want to do, that I see coming into my office, is I just need to go and get some self-care. I need to go get a massage. Oh, I just need to go and, have something nice to eat right now.
Yeah.
But in that practice, if you're looking at the behavior only, with not looking at what's the motive behind it, sometimes the self-care behaviors are actually just defense. It's just a way to escape from the suffering, or to not even notice what you're needing. And you don't even meet the need. So you're using the behavior as a way of escaping or reenacting, the inner conflict, right? So if your inner conflict is, I'm not good enough and I need to be perfect, then this whole exercise and self-care regime, while it might look good, is actually just isn't self-care at all, because you're not looking at what it is you're doing, which is you reinforcing the idea that you're not good enough and you keep having to do something by using self-care to do it, right? Or I use the self-care to bliss out and just to feel great, to separate from what I'm actually feeling and needing. And I'm actually not connecting it to my feelings and needs in my body, you know, based on my past. So,
yeah.
I
So
think
that's
that's
tricky.
really
So
important.
yeah, that can be tricky. So let's give people something to work
Mhm.
with there, because I think that can be tricky because it's subtle. You know,
It's
there's
subtle.
subtlety there, because we're saying, and we want to give ourselves good things. We want to give ourselves nourishment, fuel, the things that we really need, and want, because I totally believe that, you know, part of my whole shtick is that, you know, caring for ourselves, doing good, healthy things for ourselves, healthy choices can be a pleasure and a privilege. And I'm all about the chocolate. I think chocolate's, you know, like, I think that these things, as you said earlier, it feels good to give yourself good things when you're well and you're rested and you're nourished, you have energy and you feel, you know, vitality. It feels good. So there's nothing wrong with feeling good, and we don't want people to think it's bad to feel good, right? And yet there is a thing, you know, you're pointing to something that can happen where people can reach for things to sort of numb out or bliss out and not look at the true need. It's a little more of an obvious example when you think about someone. I mean, another speaker and I were just talking about this, how in our 20s we were really, you know, we exercised a lot, but it was all about, you know, looking a certain way, you know, having a good butt, or you know, being thin, which now I hate that word, because, like, what is that? It doesn't even mean anything. You can be like thin and also have a lot of body fat or be super unhealthy. It has nothing to do with anything you really want. It's just this idea that doesn't make sense. But as in our 20s, we were just like all about that, and it looked like we were, you know, you look at someone, oh, she's running, she's exercising, you know, she's running all the time. But it's like, it was actually abusive sometimes. You know, I would run in my 20s, in my early 20s, when I was sick all the time, not coincidentally, I would run even when I had a cold. I would run even when I was exhausted. I would just, you know, just like, because it was abusive. So that's a little less subtle, you know, the idea that some, quote, self-care things can look good, but they're not actually caring. But it's a little more subtle when we want to reach for something that might feel good. And is there, can you recommend a way that somebody can, a couple of easy ways, I mean, I can think of some too, but I want to hear from you, that we can distinguish when we're just doing that versus we're really meeting a need? You know, is there a way to be clear or to figure out?
I think it is really asking yourself the question. You just notice what you're doing. It's just bringing awareness, and bringing awareness with love to it. So if I am reaching for something to numb out, oh, I see that that's what I'm doing. I'm trying to numb out because it's hard right now.
Yeah.
Okay, maybe I'm going to choose to numb out right now, but I know that's not necessarily going to connect with what it is I'm trying to numb out about. And then I can choose later to come back to it. But maybe that practice can help soothe me enough to help me come back to what is difficult. So, you know, it's not about either or really, but it's about awareness, and it's about where it's coming from. So like if I'm saying, you know what, I'm going to just give myself a little break because I love me and I need a break and I just want some pleasure and I'm trying to use it to get away from something. All it takes is the awareness to realize, oh, I'm doing that. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
You
And
know?
no judgment. And no judgment.
And no judgment. And also recognize, you know, if that's what I keep doing, and then I start, if there's a part of me that keeps rationalizing that to me, then I realize, you know what, it's hard, but can I recognize that I'm doing this that is actually not self-care?
Yeah.
Because then it becomes me reinforcing self-neglect.
Yeah.
Do you see? And so it's really a conversation with yourself. It's like, can I see myself clearly and see what I'm doing and be interested and want to see if I can always make it just a little bit better because I care about it, right?
Yeah, I love that so much of this, and it's coming out in all of these interviews, and of course, it's certainly, I mean, I know in my work, I feel this is very important, that it is so much of this comes out in conversation. It is conversation, guided conversation, and also it's a conversation with yourself. It's about the conversation you're having with yourself and shifting that conversation. One thing that's really interesting about where this piece of the conversation is going that I want to draw out a little bit further is, you know, self-soothing is a real thing. And I know, you know, having done a lot of therapy, I know you as a therapist, it's like, it's, you know, it's a therapy word kind of, but it's something that we all need to learn to do. We do want to soothe ourselves, to mother ourselves when we are in pain or trauma or hurting, or just even even mildly, even if it's not dramatic, certainly when it's dramatic, but even when, when we've had a disappointment or a blow or something, we want to soothe ourselves. What's interesting though is that what I find, and I think you found, and I'm going to ask if it's okay to tell a little story about you in this to illustrate this, and you might know which one I'm getting at here. But as we begin to tune into ourselves more and care more about giving ourselves what really is nourishing, what really gives us capacity and gives us energy, even the things we choose to soothe ourselves can shift. They do shift. In other words, even eventually, we can revere and cherish ourselves and our resilience, want our resilience so much more than anything else. Through a process, through process, we can come to treasure ourselves so much that even when we want to soothe ourselves, we don't choose the numbing out or anything destructive kind of soothing. We choose something really nourishing and helpful that is also soothing, because we ultimately realize that to be truly soothed, we want to be nourished. To be truly soothed, we want to be healthy. We want our soothing and our pleasure to be something that gives us ongoing pleasure, not that makes us feel trashed 5 hours or 5 days later. Mm-hmm. So this came up incidentally. You know what story I'm going to talk about with the whiskey and the...
Yeah.
Can I mention this?
Yeah, absolutely.
So in working together, you had a moment where you had something happen in your life where you needed some soothing, and you went automatically to, you had a whiskey, which is, there's nothing wrong with having a whiskey. It's not per se, this is contextual, okay? It's not about the specific thing, but it's very, typical in our culture when, you're like, oh, I need a drink. It's like something bad happened, I need a drink. And afterward, you realized, and in conversation, you realized, it didn't make you really feel good. It didn't really help. And there's an aftermath for you, as there are for many people with alcohol. And you're like, that didn't actually ultimately help me deal with this situation. It was very transient, very in the moment. It was done. It was drank. It was drunk. and then I was like, now what? And in conversation, what you realized was that what you really wanted was a nice hot cup of, golden milk or cacao, and a hot bath. Mm-hmm. And that was really going to be soothing and nourishing and help you bring it down in a way that didn't provide an aftermath, sort of like a hangover, basically. And what that conversation led to was a conversation about, I think this is a great conversation for everyone, is what do we consider a gift?
Yeah.
Or what do we consider a treat? Because in our culture, we're very acculturated to think of a treat as the bad stuff. The bad stuff is the treats, and the good stuff, the healthy stuff, is like this duality, right? This divorced kind of, it's very dualistic. It's very black and white. All the good, fun stuff is bad for you, and all the healthy stuff is boring, which is actually not true. Like you say, if you look inside, if you go past the thinking and you look at what's true, like the active thing, what is really true here? Ask it, is that really true? Is the healthy stuff really not fun? And is all the fun stuff really only the unhealthy stuff? Because I think it helps us to really just ask us, in the same way, I think it's helpful to ask, what is a treat really? Mm-hmm. Is it a treat if it makes me feel bad an hour later? Was that a treat? Mm-hmm. And I think we could ask the same question about, is this really soothing?
Yeah, I love that. And I'm so glad you brought up that example, because I remember when I had that scotch, I drank coffee. Yeah, it was scotch. And I was like, and I gave it the rest to my husband. And then we had this conversation, and it was like, just by realizing what it was like asking myself, I've had a really hard day. I'm trying to calm and soothe myself. That's a loving thing to do. What's really going to help me do that, right? And instead of going to the automatic, just do the habit of what people think, or that's such a common one in society, just have a drink or something, to really go back to me and say, what would really be soothing to me? Yeah. And I remember that night I went and had a hot bath with bubbles, and then I, had my warm drink. I think it was a shatavari latte or a golden milk or something like that. And then I painted. Yeah. And then that became my treat. And I get to redefine that. I get to decide what is really a treat instead of what people push on you, which isn't a treat at all. It makes you feel like shit, right? And I'm like, oh, you mean I get to choose? I get to see that? And how did I get there? By turning inward and asking myself, what am I feeling? What am I needing? Reattune and let me give that to me.
Yeah.
And what's the best version of doing that for myself?
Yeah.
And I think that's what's so lovely working with you, Robin, is it's like, oh, you mean, oh yeah, I could improve it that way. Oh, that's a great, I didn't even think about that. And I think that's what's so helpful with the knowledge you bring, is that you know so much about what our bodies need and what's helpful for different situations. Like even the herbs, right? Like this one would really help with that.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
So, it's like, I think as humans, we want to give ourselves naturally, we want to meet our needs. Yeah. We just don't always know the best strategy. Yeah. And we automatically do what we were taught or what was modeled for us.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Which brings me to another area that you wanted to talk about, which is parenting and children, right?
Yeah, modeling. Yeah, for sure.
Right. So instead of, if a kid has a feeling of need, this is what you do. I think what you're saying is, how about tuning into the child and saying, what are you feeling and needing? And what do you think would help?
Yeah. Yeah.
You know?
Because, and I just want to, before we shift to that, I want to underscore something you said in the last thing, which is that you were able to think about it differently. And, that's the magic sauce, is really slowing down and to think about it and think about it differently and not be automatic and to think differently. It's like in a lot of these examples, it's sort of like, it's like stepping out of the automaticity of what was given to you and thinking differently. Mm-hmm. Questioning, is that true? What is true?
Yeah.
What's true for me? What do I want? And so you now have a totally different idea about what it means to soothe yourself. Mm-hmm. And
to have a treat.
Comfort yourself and to have a treat. What is a treat? You get to decide. That's the thing, is choice and a different way of thinking about it. And you get to choose. And that is, to answer the question that we raised, that is how you can give yourself pleasure without bypassing, but actually directly giving, without it being sort of like a bypass, but actually directly giving to yourself.
Right.
So really beautiful. I mean, at this point in my life, when I have a tough day or a tough time or a blow or something like that, my choices run to things like, I know what I need is, I need more sleep. I do flower essences. I go out in nature. Like, you painted and had a bath and a warm drink, and I might have flower essences and take particular herbs, like you said, because we do have the knowledge helps to know, okay, these are the things that would be extra boosting and extra like restorative right now. It's helpful to know what those things are. It's also helpful to shift our thinking about them. So really beautiful. And yes, so modeling that. So the next thing, a lot of that comes from, again, caring enough, treasuring yourself, revering yourself enough to give yourself that goodness, to be worthy of and deserving of it, and just to, where it becomes natural, like you don't want to do harm to something that's such a treasure. And you used the example earlier on, like if we could think of ourselves like a baby or a child, and what if it really is a baby or a child? So there is that, there's how we would want to treat that baby or child, but how do we model and teach? And this is an area that I'm really passionate about. How do we model and teach the next generation to do that for themselves from an earlier and earlier age? So frankly, we don't have generations of people coming to therapists and to health coaches with layers and layers that, we're happy to do it, but we're happy to help. But what would it be to grow up already knowing what a treasure you are and already knowing how to treat yourself, therefore?
Yeah.
So what are your thoughts on that as a mom and as a therapist and as someone who's done this work with me, all three of those? What are you seeing as a way to teach and model kids to start early with this, to have this now?
Yeah. I think such a huge part is just what we even talked about, is tuning in and seeing, so like as much as I can see myself and I can get clear on what I'm feeling and needing, and I live by that, then I'm modeling that for my kid. So they can see, oh, even the conversation is a different conversation at the dinner table, right? Instead of talking about stuff out there and everything else and what everyone else thinks, it's like, what are you really thinking and feeling and needing, and how are you doing with that, you know? And then even like when you're interacting with your kid, is you being interested in what they're actually feeling and what they're actually needing. And then this reminds me of an experience we had where, you know, you were talking about, hey, these are different recipes. And I was like, oh, what can what recipes do you recommend? And like, well, what about you figuring it out? I don't remember the details, but it was something like
the breakfast thing. Yeah,
the breakfast thing, yeah.
You wanted some ideas on a variety of healthy plant-based breakfasts. And I said that I could give you a list, but I said, here are a few ideas, but why don't you make a list? You make your own list for yourself and give it to me. I'll comment on it. I'll spruce it up maybe, but I'll augment it. But what do you see?
Right.
So you then came up with your list. Yeah.
And that's what I love about working with you, Robin, is that you don't reinforce the model of dependency and having someone look out there for the answers. You sort of had the question and you're happy to support, but you said, so let's go back to what is it that you would want, right?
Yeah.
What would feel good to you? Yeah. What a breakfast you enjoy, you know? Yeah. And so my son was there and he was watching. He's like, oh, Mom, can you get me a list of breakfasts too? And my immediate impulse was, okay. And I'm like, wait, it would maybe be better if I helped him figure out what breakfast he wants. Right now, I'm shifting it, so I'm tuning into you so that you can see yourself, Ethan, and you can make decisions based on what you know and feel within you, which is going to increase your sense of self-efficacy and self-esteem because it's coming from you, not from me. Yeah. And you're also going to become resourced to figure out how you're going to take good care of yourself and actually show an interest in you. So like you show an interest in me, I show an interest in you, you show an interest in, you know, like it ripples, you know, it ripples. And so, you know, I feel like that's a big piece in this is how do we not only do the self-care work, because modeling is such a huge teacher. Yeah. Right? Like if I'm doing it, they pick up on it, you know, like, I mean, I've completely moved to plant-based food and all of the kids are just like naturally eating all the plants now, you know, and they like it. And it's like, ooh, this is delicious. An eggplant the other night, you know, and, you know, so there's that element of it, but it's also, you know, getting them to be seen and to relate to them in that way too.
Yeah, I remember once during the Nourish You course, you shared the son said something about like it was the rippling. I was just so excited that to hear this like example of rippling and modeling was he said something about, you know, like as out of nowhere one day he said to you, Captain America couldn't save the world if he wasn't fueled or something, or if he wasn't, you know, healthy or whatever. And I was like, yes, this is what I'm talking about. You know, like, in their own words, in their own terms. That's how they think, like a superhero, right? You know,
like what matters to him, right?
Yeah.
And I feel like that's such a great question that you always ask people, right? What matters to you?
Absolutely.
What's important to you? And then that's what's guiding you, right? Not some idea out there.
Yeah, it's crucial. I mean, it's the only way we're going to get from, well, I got put on a regimen and I've got to stick to it so I can get a better body and fix my health, versus like, I want to fuel and nourish my amazing self and body so I can be A, B, and C and give X, Y, and Z and feel and, you know, yeah, sure, look amazing, but also, you know, to be able to do and give to what matters to me. You know, if we're connected to what matters to us, it's just a different conversation than trying to get ourselves to do things. You know, it's not working. Getting ourselves to do things is not working because, like, you know, 90% or more of the culture is not doing this stuff, and we wonder why. Well, it's because of this conversation is missing. Yeah. So, and I think the earlier we can start having this conversation, I'd love to see this conversation happen more in schools. I'm working on that. So, you know, and speaking of which, your gift, if we could shift to that, you have a beautiful free gift for our viewers, which is a little children's book called My Soul, My Best Friend. Mm-hmm. Yeah, tell us a little bit about that gift.
Yeah, you know, we're in the process of writing the gift and getting it illustrated. But the whole story, it's a story about a little drop that comes into form. You know, it's kind of like the idea of, you know, you come from the ocean, you're a drop, you come into form, you have your own, you know, unique little life, and then you realize that the essence of you is the ocean, and you're whole, and you are the ocean. So it's actually a huge spiritual journey.
Oh,
And the story is about this little drop coming into form, and then, you know, going through it. It really is a story of going through the whole evolution of consciousness. It just breaks it down very simply. It's like, first he lives in space-time and is just a little baby, and then, you know, develops a personality, and then gets really constricted with all living in all these labels and boxes, and then has to protect himself, or, you know, but there's no him or her, actually. It's a drop, so it's not gendered. It's a universal story. So it's like for any kid from any culture, right? Or
I love it.
Gender. And then, you know, learning ways to try and protect, developing the personality, developing the unique defenses, feeling the suffering around that, becoming aware of the fact that they're stuck, asking questions, turning inward, realizing that there is an aspect within themselves that is observing and witnessing and present, and realizing that you have a mature soul and a young soul, and that they got split, and how do they come back together. So it's kind of like the mature soul then becomes that function that is really what we're talking about, the mindfulness function. And says, hey, I see you, this is your pain, here, I'm here with you, let me help you not collapse into your defense, let me help you not become a puddle of water, let me help you not turn into icicles and throw them at people. How do we tame these automatic defenses to heal within and reconnect? And so there's a whole story, which is, you know, hopefully a really simple, and yet it's very complex, I think, but trying to make it really simple, that it's a story for anyone, that's really just talking about your own journey as a human being, right?
I love it. I can't wait to see it. It sounds really beautiful. Really beautiful.
And I'm really excited because it's co-written with Maria Perrin. She's a Spanish-speaking woman from Venezuela originally, and she's going to be translating it into Spanish. And then Yumiko Isakano, who's in Japan, she's going to actually do the illustrations. So it's gonna become a really beautiful book with illustrations to bring it more to life. So right now, what you guys are getting is just the draft written form, but it gives you the idea and the teachings of what we're talking about today. And then she's hopefully going to translate that into Japanese. So we're trying to make this available for kids. You know, she's an art therapist in Japan. There's a huge need for those children to, you know, get like some support. Like children everywhere, right?
Absolutely, so children everywhere. I'm really looking at bringing like a version of this into schools, and I'm working on a pilot right now with a school in California. So I will definitely want to get my hands on that because we may want to use that. So
and so as people read it, just imagine in your mind a little drop, because that's the idea. It'll make more sense, some of the writing, if you understand it's a little drop who's having its life journey.
Beautiful. That's so beautiful. And this whole conversation, Eloise, was beautiful. It brought out so many important things that I want people to have. So thank you for taking the time. It just lovely to know you and work with you on all different levels. And thank you everybody for tuning in again, and watch your inbox for more on what's happening with self-care as a sacred practice, and be good to yourself. Okay.